The United States quit last night after, and that's why we called you in. Why exactly did he decide to quit? Was it that he may have been in violation of the Logan Act in talking to the Russian ambassador, or was it that he misrepresented or lied to the vice president about what he remembered? Why is he gone?
Steve, I would refer you to General Flynn's resignation letter, wherein he addresses that very issue, and it seems to be the latter, which is he was having any number of calls, and that in the end he felt he had misled or misrepresented all the facts to the president and to the vice president, and for that he was enormously and deeply sorry. And that really was the linchpin here, is that he either forgot, couldn't fully recall, or outwardly misled the vice president and others when he was characterizing a conversation he had had with the Russian ambassador. And I think that the situation became increasingly unsustainable, and he decided to resign.
What changed, though? From when you said he had the president's full confidence, what changed in terms of the facts that made him resign at 11 o'clock, where 3 hours earlier you said he had the president's full confidence?
Well, it wasn't 3 hours earlier. It was many hours earlier. But the fact is that the president is a very loyal person, and he has a team here that serves him very admirably. And in this case, information had been forthcoming for a while, but the situation had gotten to, I think, a fever pitch yesterday, later in the day, such that it became unsustainable. Just yesterday, the National Security Advisor was part of the visit by the bilateral visit by the Canadian Prime Minister Justin Trudeau. He was in the presidential daily briefing. He had been part of leader calls with presidents from around the globe. But in the end, it really was the misleading or the forgetfulness about characterizing that conversation that I think was the linchpin here. And look, I just want to say to everyone that General Flynn has a 3-decade-plus record of service as an intelligence officer, as a military official, that should not be overlooked. In this particular case, there was an incident or so that just became unsustainable for him to carry on in that role, and that was a decision he made, and the president accepted his resignation and is moving on with an acting National Security Advisor, General Keith Kellogg, who worked with the team very well and for a very long time. And then he'll also be entertaining perhaps former Navy SEAL and Vice Admiral Mr. Harward, and also General Petraeus, who's known to everyone.
Right. Did the president try to talk him out of the resignation?
I won't characterize private conversations, Ainsley. I just know that these things are never easy. And I could tell, we all know that Donald Trump is known for his loyalty, and people are known for their loyalty to him. And in this case, it just became a situation that needed to be rectified. And
Sure.
I think that it's General Flynn who made that decision and tendered his resignation.
There are some stories out that Sally Yates, the then acting attorney general, had alerted the White House that Mr. Flynn might be open to blackmail because of what the conversation was, whatever that was. What's extraordinary to me, and we've known that, and why he acted last night, he did what he did. But what's extraordinary to me is just the fact that there are a number of major U.S. papers that apparently got the leaks from the intel community that said, hey, look, we've got the transcript of what Mr. Flynn said on the phone to the Russian ambassador, and looks kind of shady. Just the fact that there are these leaks inside the permanent government is troubling.
Well, you may be the only outlet talking about that this morning, so thank you for shining a light there. I'll let the public make their own decisions based on what you just said. But it is disturbing. Look, leaks are always disturbing. I think the President of the United States has made that very clear. And leaks, when it has to do with security and intelligence information, are that much more concerning, just hypothetically in the main. What I would say in this case is, if you read these reports and then you realize that that in this specific instance, what became unsustainable long term was just the particular characterization of the contacts between General Flynn and others as he related them to the highest officials in our land. And also, I just wanted to say that speaking with President Trump this morning, he made reference to me about Charles Krauthammer, your Fox News colleague's comments on your network last night, and wanted me to reference those as well, because it's not a particular contact or incident by itself. It's really the cumulative effect of that leading to incomplete or misleading forgetful information, frankly,
Right.
incomplete and misleading
Right.
information. That really was the key here.
Well, I'll read exactly what he said. He said, "What strikes me is how bizarre the whole story is. This is a cover-up without a crime. The idea that one should be all aghast because the incoming National Security Advisor spoke with the Russian ambassador and spoke about sanctions seems to me to be perfectly reasonable. The idea that was illegal is preposterous." Is that what you were referring to?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is. And thank you for repeating those remarks. I wish others were doing that today, just because I think that's important here as context, where others are questioning timing and all that. It's very important to note that and to realize that, you know, Vice President Pence went on national TV, as did others in the administration, frankly, based on information that was provided that was either incorrect or incomplete.
Kellyanne,
So the fact that he talked about sanctions with the Russian ambassador did not bother the president. Is that correct?
No, I don't want to say that. I don't know that, and it's not for me to say that. It's just the key is how did we get to this point,
right,
and where do we go from this point is really what we're focused today on at the White House.
And Kellyanne, there's a story in the New York Times that said that the vice president was angry at Mr. Flynn because he lied to him. Do you think that's accurate description?
Well, I don't like to characterize other people's emotions, but I've worked with Vice President Pence for over a decade, and he is a man who's slow to anger. He's a very deliberative individual, obviously brilliant, and serves this country very well as our vice president. And he has, I think his office has publicly said that General Flynn and the vice president had spoken a couple of times, and that General Flynn had apologized to the vice president. And then fast forward, General Flynn ended up resigning, and the president accepted that resignation.
All right. Well, we wish General Flynn all the best. You're right.
Absolutely.
He had 30 years serving our country, and something like this, you just don't want that to taint his reputation after he's sacrificed so much for our country.
I
We
agree
wish him the best.
completely, Ainsley. We do. And also, we wish the president and the vice president the best as they find a new national security advisor. I think some people are high-fiving themselves today that somehow they got their wish. Folks, this is national security and intelligence, and that means it affects us all.
Yeah.
And so it's just, we need to move on as a country and get that right in the next phases very quickly, and indeed the president will. The president has already discussed options, and he has General Kellogg in there as his acting national security advisor, and will be meeting with his team today to move very swiftly.
Now, is it true that General Petraeus is coming to the White House today?
It's true that General Petraeus has been mentioned as one possible permanent replacement, along with Vice Admiral, former Navy SEAL, Mr. Harward, and of course, acting national security advisor, assistant to the president, General Keith Kellogg.
Is he coming to the White House today?
I haven't looked at today's schedule since last night. I got called to come over here.
You've been kind of busy.
Yeah, I know, and we appreciate it. Also, we understand that Vice Admiral Michelle Howard is also a leading candidate to replace Flynn. Have you heard that?
Well, she certainly has served this country with great distinction, and we'll have to see how the day progresses and what the president decides to do.
When will he make a decision, do you think?
Well, he'll need to take his time in terms of considering who is best for this role. And as you just know, you've mentioned a name. I've mentioned 3 other names. Obviously, he has many great choices, and he'll make that decision on his timeline as he always does. The one thing about President Trump is we always know who's in charge, his choice, his voice. Ultimately, these decisions rest with him, and we all respect that.
Kellyanne, what about the different messages from you and Sean Spicer? You come out and say the confidence of the president is with Flynn. Spicer comes out a little while later and says, still, essentially we're still deliberating on that. It's still up in the air. What about the difference in messaging there?
Well, they're both true. In other words, the president is a very loyal person. He has confidence that the National Security Advisor, Mike Flynn, was involved in many different briefings and phone calls, and of course the bilateral meeting yesterday with Prime Minister Justin Trudeau of Canada. And I think as the night wore on and General Flynn decided that this was no longer sustainable, he tendered his resignation. The president accepted that resignation. Obviously, it was becoming a situation which was untenable. If you're misleading or providing incomplete or inaccurate information to the vice president, then, if not others, then it's an area where course corrections will need to be taken, and General Flynn decided to do that last night. And obviously, the president accepted his resignation.
In the middle of you making Valentine's Day cards with your kids, so when the news broke. Thank you so much, Kellyanne, and happy Valentine's Day to you and
take care.
your
Same to you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
All right. Well, there you go.
Crazy day, 25 days in.
17 minutes now before the top of the hour on this Tuesday. Who's really behind the anti-Trump movement sweeping the country? The shocking allegation, it's actually former President Barack Obama. Our next guest lays out how he is working behind the scenes to sabotage the new president.
David Ignatius is a columnist for the Washington Post. He disclosed Flynn's contacts with Ambassador Kislyak in a column last month. He's with us from our Washington bureau. David, thanks for joining us.
Great to be with you.
First of all, what challenges has the fallout over these conversations created for the White House?
Well, I think above all, it's a test for President Trump to decide whether General Flynn can regain confidence of his colleagues in the White House, of the members of the National Security Council, whom he serves as National Security Advisor. That's a job that more than most in government requires the trust of the people that you work with. General Flynn was accused of having misled Vice President Pence. That the facts on that are still being sorted out, but I think it's really going to be crucial for him that if he stays in that job, he regain the confidence of his peers.
Speaking of that, we've talked a lot about the state of relations between President Trump and the intelligence community. What do revelations about these calls mean for those relations, you think?
Well, I think the revelation that at the very time that the U.S., the Obama administration, was expelling Russian diplomats to punish them for a covert attack by their intelligence service on the U.S. political system, and also, I should note, those sanctions involved mistreatment of U.S. Diplomatic personnel abroad. At the very time that was happening, the National Security Advisor designate for the next administration was talking with the Russian ambassador. Even if his initial statement that he didn't talk directly about sanctions proves to be true, there are a lot of people who would question the timing of that. Was it appropriate? I think for the intelligence community, which is deeply involved in trying to deal with Russian hacking, this Russian covert action, also has been feeling the brunt of Russian intelligence pressure around the world. This was disturbing. So part of what Donald Trump and his National Security Advisor need to do is, over time, regain the confidence of the people they're going to ask to carry out their policies. President Trump went to the CIA as part of that. I'm sure General Flynn has been talking daily with intelligence officials. That's part of what you do as National Security Advisor. But there were bruised feelings, to put it mildly, in the initial aftermath.
Let's talk about this North Korea missile launch. The president spoke just 33 words to reporters after the launch. Here's what Senior Policy Advisor Stephen Miller said to John Dickerson on Sunday.
Last night was a show of strength, saying that we stand with our ally. Having the two men appear on camera worldwide to all of planet Earth was a statement that will be understood very well by North Korea.
And Stephen Miller referencing there an appearance by President Trump standing side by side with the Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. David, how would you expect North Korea to have understood that picture?
I think the picture is important, as the Abe visit was important, as a reinforcement of the fundamentals of the U.S. security relationship with Japan. Japan is really the U.S. most important ally in Northeast Asia. Japan is a big, solid country with increasing military power. It works with the United States on missile defense. And the Japanese view these North Korean missile launches that land in the sea to the east of Japan, the west of Japan, as a direct threat, potential threat to their security. So standing side by side, I think was sensible. Letting Prime Minister Abe have the strongest words, that, as he said, this is absolutely intolerable, and to have Trump be more restrained in his very limited comments. No, I don't think that's a problem. What matters is the signal that this relationship is on solid footing after a period during the campaign when it looked like that might not be the case.
So, David, commentators have called this a test of the new administration. If it is a test, what do you think North Korea has gleaned from the U.S. response so far?
Well, I think it would be wrong to think that the right response to this test is some kind of instant display of U.S. power. U.S. power often is most persuasive when it's least discussed. And I think that there will be steps over the next month. There are scheduled military exercises with South Korea that the North Koreans regard as very threatening. I think they'll be bigger, stronger, more compelling this year than they ever have been. I think that sends a message in a real way. I think a kind of sharp statement, indignant language, I think that's in this situation not persuasive. Trump has said about the North Korean nuclear threat to the U.S., it won't happen. That was his statement several months ago. It's a pretty strong statement, and the question is, how does he back it up? And I think not rushing into that policy, but kind of letting it develop. He sent his Secretary of Defense, General Mattis, to South Korea and Japan to talk about this issue. That's the right way to do this. Carefully, deliberately, step by step.
All right. David Ignatius, thanks so much for your perspective. Appreciate it.
Thanks, Lynn.
That preserves their particular position. But all indications are that the National Security Advisor, Mike Flynn, has antagonized key Trump White House officials to the degree that, given numerous opportunities today and over the weekend to offer his own vote of confidence for his National Security Advisor, President Trump has declined to do so. And the brief moment this afternoon when Kellyanne Conway, a counselor of the president, said General Flynn had the full confidence of the president, within less than an hour, the White House completely undercut Conway's statement, obliterating it and questioning her own credibility by saying the president was evaluating Flynn's future. This is after Flynn spent the entire weekend with President Trump at the Winter White House in Mar-a-Lago and had several phone conversations with Vice President Mike Pence. I'm led to believe he attempted to apologize in those conversations, but those attempts did not satisfy Pence. And importantly, they did not satisfy the White House Chief of Staff, Reince Priebus. Those are some of the White House officials very skeptical about the necessity and the usefulness of keeping Flynn in this White House and on this team. For the moment, he is still on the team and still in the White House. But his future appears not murky, Elaine, but very tenuous indeed.
Meantime, Major, there are reports that things are extremely tense among members of the National Security Council itself. What do you make of that?
Well, the Security Council is not fully staffed, and that's one problem. There just aren't enough people inside the White House assigned to the National Security Council with enough deputies to carry out the workflow, provide the memos, and handle what's known as the interagency process. One of the chief obligations, if not the most important obligation of the National Security Advisor and everyone who works on the National Security Council staff, is to be the White House interagency general, if you will, the one in charge of keeping in touch with the State Department, the CIA, the Pentagon, and other aspects of the American foreign policy network, and work all of their issues simultaneously. Well, if you don't have enough people to do that, things break down. And Flynn's own leadership of the few people he does have rubbed some people in the White House the wrong way. Communication hasn't always been good, and allegiances have been strained. These are kind of workmanlike issues that typically don't get discussed in a time like this, because usually a team that comes in from an election has a general sense of how to, A, staff a National Security Council, and B, make it function, if not at top speed, at something approximating top speed. But this goes back, Elaine, to a problem that existed from the transition efforts during the campaign and the transition efforts after President Trump won the election. They were not as thorough and they were not as widespread as they could have been. The transition efforts in the latter stage of the campaign were essentially halted at Mr. Trump's direction, and then they were put together and refocused very rapidly and somewhat unexpectedly after his Election Day victory. The transition itself was rough, and some of the consequences of that understaffed and rough transition carried out by a lot of people who did not have nearly as much experience as administrations coming in of the past. Well, some of those problems are now visiting themselves in real time to this White House.
So, Major, against the backdrop of that rough transition, I want to get your take on something else. Reports that members of the Intelligence Committee are reportedly withholding information, or Intelligence Community, I should say, are reportedly holding information from the president. Have you heard anything on that front?
I have not. I don't have any original reporting on that at all. One small element of that potential story is that on Friday, the CIA, which is led by an appointee of the president, Mike Pompeo, he's the CIA director, nominated by the president, confirmed by the United States Senate. That CIA denied a top deputy of National Security Advisor Mike Flynn top secret security clearance for a position, essentially rendering that person ineffective and incapable of carrying out the job that Mike Flynn wanted them to. Now, that doesn't fall necessarily into the category or under the umbrella of the intelligence community withholding information from the president. I have nothing that verifies that or substantiates that. You've talked about reports that indicate as much. I don't know. What I do know is someone within this White House who Mike Flynn had tapped to be a top advisor and figurehead within the National Security Council was denied a top secret security clearance by the CIA. That's more, Elaine, than a simple intramural disagreement. That is a rank signal that your person doesn't have what it takes to receive a top secret security clearance. They're essentially useless to you and to the federal government, and that is something that can only be interpreted by someone like General Flynn as a direct slap, and if not only a direct slap, a humiliation of their own attempt to build their team within the White House.
All right, Major Garrett at the White House for us. Major, thank you.
Sure.